my name is Eltier, and I'm the digital storytelling strategist at Amazon Watch. And today I have Dr. Erika Berenguer with me. She is a research scientist and expert on the Brazilian Amazon, a senior research associate at Lancaster University, and a visiting research associate at the University of Oxford. So, hi, Erika. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, so you're calling in from Oxford, right?
Yes, I am in wintry England at the moment.
Wintry England. So, first question, what exactly are you an expert in, and how did you become an expert advocate for the Amazon?
So my PhD was look at the impacts of selective logging and fires in the Amazon. So look at impacts in carbon stocks, how this interacts with climate change, and also impacts biodiversity. And then as my career progressed, I got more and more into the impacts of deforestation as well, besides logging and fires. And to become an advocate for what you do in science, well, part of it is I like to communicate, so it's natural. But part of it is also because my studies in Brazil, my undergrad, they were public finance. They're financed by the government. And I feel that it's my duty as a citizen to give back the knowledge that I have acquired through public funding. So that's why I speak about the Amazon, but also it's an act of love. I love the Amazon so much that I don't know how to live without talking about it and sharing that love and that knowledge.
That's really beautiful. So it's like an act of service, like
Yeah.
using your expertise as to repay the world. That's a beautiful answer. So from your perspective as a scientist, as an expert, what must be done to protect and then possibly restore the Amazon?
Right now, what we have to do is to end deforestation. There's no other way of putting it. We need to end deforestation immediately. That's the most important thing that we can do to protect the Amazon right now. But of course, for listeners, watchers in other countries, it might not be viable to end deforestation in the Amazon. So one thing is to decrease our carbon footprint, decrease our emissions, also something incredibly important as the Amazon is already being severely affected by climate change.
Okay, so on that note about deforestation, what do the rates of deforestation in 2021 tell us about next year's rates?
So what do we expect? We are about to receive the latest numbers of deforestation in the Amazon, usually come out in November. We are recording this in October. So I expect them to be above 10,000 square kilometers this year again. This has been the pattern that we saw in 2019 and also what we saw in 2020. They've been between 10 and 11,000 square kilometers. I know this is a bit abstract. So to make it easier is the equivalent of 1 million football pitches. And when I mean football, I mean soccer. It's 1 million soccer pitches,
right?
Which is something that is really hard to grasp. I'm a soccer fan, I'm Brazilian, and I find even 4 soccer pitches together hard to imagine. So 1 million is just, it's incredible. And
yeah. I can't. Exactly. It's such a large number. So, then what is the relationship between deforestation and then the fires in the Amazon and what is now known as the quote unquote burning season in the Brazilian Amazon?
That's an excellent question. And I love the fact that you call it burning season, not the fire season. And that's crucial. Yes. Because if we say the fire season, it gives the impression that it's a natural phenomenon, which is not. It's the fires in the Amazon are started by humans. So the fact that you call the burning season, you are putting the action on someone. So I love that. So the deforestation process requires fire as much as requires bulldozers. And that's the connection between the deforestation and the burning season. How it happens is that first, you bring some bulldozers to literally bring the forest down. The forest then remains on the floor, remains on the ground, completely dead for several weeks into the dry season. So it has the sun on it, a lot of wind, so that material becomes really dry and can be set on fire. And after set on fire, it completely disappears into literally smoke and also into ashes. And then that's when the land can be planted. So without the fire, there's no point in deforesting land because you're going to have all the corpses of the forest laying on the ground. So fire is a necessary part of the deforestation process.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't quite understand that. And that kind of like fits into my next question, which is, and you already kind of answered it, which is what is the difference between the so-called fire season, the burning season in the Amazon, and the fires that we're seeing in the American West or even Australia? Because often when we're looking at headlines about climate change and fires, they're starting to group them all together, the Amazon plus the American West or British Columbia.
Climate change is changing fire regimes worldwide, which includes, for example, the forest in California. But the changes over there on fires becoming more frequent or more intense. But those forests have co-evolved with fires. I remember when visiting redwoods forests in California, seeing the thickness of the bark of those trees. It's just amazing. Or if you think about the Mediterranean, that's where cork comes from. And cork is just a way of a tree to insulate itself from the effects of fire.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's just because it's so hot during a fire that you can kill the tree. You can kill the hardwood of the tree, the inner center of the tree. So cork is just a protection, just an insulation that those high temperatures don't kill the tree. But Amazon didn't evolve with fires. It's a rainforest, which is a name which I absolutely adore. In English, is much better than in Portuguese, because when you say rainforest, you already can imagine the sheer volume of rain that place gets. So if it's a very rainy place, means that it's very humid, and therefore it's impossible to burn. It's trying to burn a paper that is wet. It's just impossible. It's not going to light on fire. But with the use of fire for deforestation, as we spoke, and those fires can escape into nearby forests. But normally those fires would die out because it's too humid, as I said. But given climate change, forests are becoming hotter and drier. A recent study shows that in the dry season, parts of the Amazon are already 2.5 degrees hotter than in the 70s.
Wow.
Yeah, 2.5. And also, that's measured, that's not a model projection.
That's
and
pretty incredible.
It's super incredible and also scary. And
right.
Those areas are also becoming drier. Certain parts receive 34% less rain than they used to in the 70s during the dry season. So in the dry season, we have forests which are hotter and drier. So when that fire escapes from the deforestation area and get inside the forest, all of a sudden it's not humid enough for the fire to dry out. The fire can actually sustain itself and carry on burning. So that is a problem that is becoming increasingly problematic in the Amazon. But forest fires in the Amazon are very different from those in California. They're just 30 to 50 centimeters high. So they are, which is about 1 foot, I think. So they're very tiny.
They're tiny.
They're tiny. I put them
very interesting.
Yes, but the problem is that the fire line can go on for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers in regions that are very hard to access. So it's not that easy to put them out. If you think that the Amazon is the size of Europe, how you all of a sudden control fire lines in all that region is very difficult. But it's very different from the Californian fires, which are canopy fires. You have those great big plains, etc. It's a completely different type of fire.
Wow, thank you for that visual. I think that's super helpful to try to just see in my mind's eye how these fires are playing out in that landscape. And, you know, the statistics that you're talking about are pretty scary, you know, the 1 million football pitches, the way that climate change is altering ecosystems around the world. And so, you know, the UN's International Panel on Climate Change, you know, released a report in August that was really quite stark. And it had, you know, some data on the Amazon. So I'm curious as to what the world should take away from that report in general, and then also maybe more specifically what it says about the Amazon.
The report has some good news and some bad news for the Amazon. One piece of good news is that it says that it's unlikely that Amazon is going to reach a tipping point in this century. So till 2100, it's unlikely that this will happen. Bear in mind that the IPCC classifies stuff. They are finding very likely, likely, unlikely. So they say it's unlikely that it will happen, which is good news for the Amazon. They don't say that it will never gonna happen. They just say that it's unlikely to happen within the century. However, they have plenty of historic figures on, for example, the number of days above 35 degrees Celsius that is going to happen in the region under the different projections of the climate scenarios. Across the world, the Amazon is one of the most affected regions for that. The number of days of temperature above 35 degrees is going to be, I think, over 200, which makes living conditions for the 40 million people living across the Amazon basin close to impossible. It's really hard living under those conditions. Not great news for the Amazon, but I mean, it's just not as bad as it could be. So I'm just searching for something to hang on to in that sense.
Okay, so it seems like, the Amazon is in a state of great change, and it's making headlines around the world. So I wanted to ask you, as your perspective as a Brazilian and also as a Brazilian scientist, like, what are the top things that people misunderstand about the intersection of Brazilian politics and also indigenous rights?
There are several misunderstandings. So one of them is that there's no such thing as the indigenous people, that over 300 different ethnicities in the across the Amazon, not only the Brazilian Amazon, but across the Amazon. I think that's really important to avoid having this homogenizing something that it shouldn't be homogenized, because then we cannibalize different struggles. So that is one thing that I find a key. Second is that it's not that simple to protect the Amazon. If it was simple, it would be protected by now. And often people think, oh, so how about giving land rights to indigenous people? Great. There's lots of indigenous areas across the Amazon. However, deforestation still happens within indigenous lands. And that's because of lack of what you call command and control operations. So basically lack of control to see, it's not because you have a title to a land that the land is protected, unfortunately. It should be by the law. But it's the same as saying, why was the supermarket robbed? I mean, in theory, it shouldn't, because it's private property. Nobody should go inside. Still, it's robbed. So it's the same thing. Having the title of land doesn't resolve. And that is something that often I hear people saying, well, shouldn't we just buy a lot of land across the Amazon and therefore protect it? Because, I mean, if we have a title, then would be great, but it doesn't work like that, as I just said. Just to give you an example, there's a state, so Brazil is divided into states, just like the United States is. And there's a state where I work, Pará, which is about 12 times the size of the UK, so it's a very large state. And if we were to add up all the land registries that there is for the state, including protected areas, including indigenous lands, but also including private properties, farms, if we were to add them up, Pará would be 4 levels. We need never 4 times the size of the state, because we have way more land titles than area. And that shows the confusion around this and the illegality of the processes as well, because you can just create fake land titles, make it look really old, and say, well, but this is my land. But then someone else has title for that land, and someone else has title for that land. And then you create all this land tenure confusion in Amazon.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a bunch of things happening, right? One on a broad level, indigenous peoples are not a monolith. The great cultural diversity that we see in the Amazon reflects its biological diversity. And those cultures, indigenous cultures, have evolved hand in hand with their local ecologies for millennia. And, and that also leads to what we're seeing today, which is that even in Brazil itself, but also through the entire basin, which spans 9 countries, we have the southern Brazilian Amazon, which is a very different ecosystem than the Amazon forest that we're seeing in Peru or Ecuador, and have very different, quote, natural resources that corporations and governments want to get at. And then we have a overlap of poor law enforcement on behalf of the federal government in Brazil to enforce its environmental laws. And then we also have a bureaucratic nightmare in terms of the land titles.
Yes. And also something else that I forgot to add is that the Amazon has never been part of a state strategy within Brazil. I cannot talk about the other countries, but within Brazil, which has the largest fraction of the Amazon, has 60% of the Amazon, Amazon protection has not been part of a state strategy. And by that, I mean, it has not crossed several different governments. It's always government based. Right now, we have a government that is very pro deforestation. It's openly against environmental protection. And therefore, we have seen a lot of deregulation happening, which includes, for example, budget cuts for environmental protection. But if the Amazon had been a state project, doesn't matter who was in power, protection would still be a priority of us as a state, as a nation. But it has not been the case.
Yeah. No, things get quite simplified when you have your real world like realities on the ground, and then the way it translates into the international press, so much gets lost in literal translation, but also the translation from the data and the reality and to the news articles that we see. You mentioned a little bit earlier the tipping point in the IPCC report, and so I'm curious as to what you think about the term of the tipping point.
The tipping point is hard, and it's very useful to illustrate what might happen. And it's a hard concept though, because we don't know when we will reach it. And often people think, well, if we have not reached the tipping point, so that's okay, all the deforestation that has happened till now, which is definitely not true. I was talking about impacts that we are already seeing in the Amazon, like increasing temperature and decreases in rainfall. And part of this is caused by deforestation. We have the local impacts impacts of deforestation on local climate. We also see various species declining as a consequence of deforestation. So it's not because we have not reached the tipping point that everything is fine. It's not fine, and it's getting worse, especially in certain regions of the Amazon, which is something that you mentioned
right
before. So the south and the east of the Amazon are in a way worse shape than the west of the Amazon, for example. So the tipping point then comes into this again as this unified view that the Amazon's gonna hit it, and then it's gonna completely, be going towards the tip point, and then it's gonna flip. But maybe, and that's something that a recent paper brought to light, it's not going to be the whole Amazon together. It's going to be regionalized. We are going to have certain parts of the Amazon, like the south and the east that I mentioned, that are highly deforested, and the west is way more preserved. So the south and the east may reach this tipping point earlier, may flip earlier. We don't know to what it's going to flip to. We know that likely when we say the tipping point is because the forest is going to lose its capacity to recycle water. 80% of the rainfall in the Amazon is actually recycled water. It's not through masses of air that come from the Atlantic. It's actually just water being pumped from the soil through the trees and back into the atmosphere. That's why we see in documentaries those great images of the Amazon at dawn with those clouds over the forest.
Yeah, it looks so beautiful.
It's gorgeous, and it's just rainfall being created. It's just that recycling of water. But we reach the tipping point means that we don't have enough forest to recycle that water. And if we don't have rain, we cannot have a rain forest.
Right.
So that's what the tipping point is about. It's a useful communication tool, but I'm really concerned about completely dismissing the impacts across the basin that we are seeing due to deforestation just because we have not yet reached the tipping point. It's almost like you are in a completely broken house, full of rats, cockroaches, the ceiling has collapsed, you have no running water, no electricity, no heating, but you say, well, at least it's not on fire.
And then in this case, it is on fire. In fact,
Exactly.
very literally on fire. And your explanation about the tipping point is just really goes back to what you were saying earlier about there's no silver bullet for Amazon protection. It's got to be across very many different levels of governance, of rights protection, and a priority. And it's, in our work at Amazon Watch, we tried to touch on all of that. And well, thank you. So we're going to move into our next segment, which is I'm going to throw some quote solutions that we have heard in the news cycle about protecting the Amazon. And I would just like to hear your gut response to them. And as a scientist, I know that you want to give the most, comprehensive, nuanced take, but just really kind of a quick gut response on it, if you feel comfortable.
I try my best not to say it depends to everything.
Well, thank you for going along with us. You're a great sport. So, I don't know if it's going to catch you off guard, but our first one up is carbon credits.
Wow. It depends. Carbon credits can be one way to protect the Amazon, and we need multiple ways. However, it cannot be used as a license to pollute elsewhere. Mm-hmm. That's my short answer.
That's your short answer. Okay, great. Okay, next up, $1 billion from the Biden administration into the hands of President Bolsonaro.
Short answer. The Bolsonaro government is ending by the end of next year, and his first run, he can get reelected. If he gets reelected, it may be useful, but we need results. And by results, I mean actual results and not data wrangling. So far, what we have seen is that the government goes like, oh, deforestation in Amazon this month has decreased by 10%, but it's 10% in relation to the previous year, which was 150% higher than the usual average for the month. So it needs to be results to an actual baseline from before this government and also we cannot keep shifting baselines to what we compare to, which is what Brazil has done in its commitments to the climate agreement. So if Bolsonaro gets reelected, it could be a useful tool to protect the Amazon, but we need real results based on real data, a real baseline. Mm-hmm. That wasn't something I can answer.
That's okay. Next up is adopt a park schemes.
The current way that adopt a park is being conducted in Brazil, it's not very clear. How the money gets to the actual protected areas and what can be spent is not ideal. It could be a scheme that it could be useful. It could be useful to hire, for example, people for command and control operations, to buy cars, to buy diesel. It could be useful, but at its current format, it's not.
Okay, great. Corporate boycotts.
Well, we need a multitude of solutions for them. There's no one single silver bullet. I mean, if there was, we would have come up with it already. But we need a multitude of solutions. And I guess the greatest example is the pandemic. The pandemic, we know that the vaccine is responsible for the rates of cases really decreasing, but we need a mask, we need social distancing, we need washing our hands, etc., etc., etc. So complex problems require complex solutions. For the Amazon, it's the same. So corporate boycotts can be one tool, but they will not be the only tool to resolve deforestation in the Amazon. So they can be useful, but not alone.
All right. And the last one, deploying the military to protect the Amazon.
It's ludicrous. I'm a biologist.
Yeah.
Would you put me in control of the army?
Right. No, they're not analogous at all.
It doesn't make sense. Would you put your doctor to fix your car? No, different expertises. And the Brazilian, I don't know how is the US Army, but the Brazilian Army does not have the expertise to protect the Amazon. That's an expertise that for the past 2 decades have been, nurtured in different institutions in Brazil, like the Environmental Agency and like our spatial agency. What is our NASA, let's call it, but has not been nurtured within the army. So the army has no expertise. So it's just a waste of money to deploy the army to protect the Amazon.
Yeah, it's very interesting that there's been a deliberate strategy to defund the very institutions that have that knowledge built up over decades that can really actually help protect the Amazon. But then when put under scrutiny, oh, okay, let's just send in the military, which has been linked to corruption and just general ineptitude. So,
yeah.
All right, good to know that was pretty clear cut. Pretty clear no from you. So, we just ran through this list of possible proposed solutions, and some are more promising than others. But, really, what are specific actions people who don't live in Brazil, who don't live in the Amazon, but who care, what can they do to support Amazon protection?
One thing that everybody can do, and I think is really important, is to be aware of our emissions and reduce them as we can in our lives. Of course, this means different things for different people in different countries, in different realities, and that's fine. But climate change is a real threat to the forest, and it can contribute to its tipping point. And also, as I said, is making the forest hotter, drier, which makes more vulnerable to fires. Fires lead to huge CO2 emissions. So one thing that everyone, regardless where they are, can do is to control their emissions, to reduce the emissions. But discussing about the Amazon is also something that everybody can do and is really useful. To raise awareness is extremely important. To promote local voices, very important. But I guess the most important thing that everyone can do is to actually ask their politicians what is their strategy in terms of purchases coming from Amazonian countries. Are they supporting deforestation? Because this is something that people don't realize, but we have what we call in academia this telecouple connections, which is, for example, high demand of beef, of canned beef in the UK, I'm based in the UK, those are my UK examples, but high demand of canned beef in the UK, driving therefore deforestation in the Amazon to sell beef, to produce canned beef. So what are your country doing? What are asking your politicians that they are doing to protect the Amazon? That's really important.
Yeah, because, a big branch of our advocacy and campaigning work at Amazon Watch is climate finance. And it's really quite unsexy and hard to explain to people that, our financial system has perverse incentives to keep investing into companies that are exploiting loopholes or lack of governance and oversight in Brazil and other Amazonian countries. And you would never know if you've just been set up a 401k with your, at your new job, if it's with Vanguard or connected to BlackRock, or if you use JP Morgan Chase as, your bank, like it has direct ties and direct impacts. And, people go their whole lives without knowing, but once they, find that out, they're really quite motivated to make changes or to ask those questions, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So it's really about like lifting the curtain and seeing like, this is the complicated system that is driving this destruction. But there's actual measures that you can take as an individual to help. Awesome. So, we, spent a lot of time talking about this as a perspective of a researcher and of a scientist and as a biologist, but, as you as a person, like how has Amazon destruction and the burning season affected you personally?
It has like affected me in a variety of ways, and a lot of them I don't know how to express myself, not even in Portuguese, because it's beyond the words. It's how you feel, how you deal with life. But it's very common when you're driving along remote areas to the forested parts of the Amazon. During the burning season, it's common to see the fires, and it's something that hasn't changed. That was part of the motivation on when I first decided to work in the Amazon 15 years ago. Amazon destruction was my motivation. And to continue to see it, it's very painful because kind of questions my whole existence, right? What am I doing to my life if this is still going on? But also it feels for me that a part of me is lost every time I see the forest chopped, because it's a big part of my identity as a person. You don't work in Amazon because it's comfortable, because it's not. You don't work because you have, a great work-life balance. You're just not. It's just really hard to get. You get series of diseases. It's not easy. You do it because you really believe it and you really love it. So it becomes a really big part of your identity. And every time you drive along and you see a large area of the forest, it's a little bit of you that has been destroyed. And especially when you know the impact so well, which is my job, instantly you start to run numbers in your head. Instantly you know how that is making the world a worse place, which is exactly what you're trying to avoid. But personally, I feel that I'm a jigsaw puzzle and that you just took another piece out, and that piece will never come back.
Yeah, grief is really hard to put into words, but I think that all of us all around the world can relate to what you're saying, on at least on some level, in terms of the grief of climate change and climate chaos, and how it impacts the local spaces that are really, really precious to us. So thank you for sharing that. And, we've come to the end and we've talked about really heavy stuff. And I just, do you have hope? Do you have hope?
I do, especially, I don't, it's hard after talking about grief to talk about hope. And I remember first time I saw the forest burning during the El Nino 2015. I worked with burning forest before, but that was the first time that I actually saw it happening. And I was trying to put the fires out with my boots, and my boots melted. And you change from one foot to the other, and then the other also melts, and you're just like, oh, what am I gonna do? And I remember just crying, and I was then with my machete banging on the fires and trying to throw some soil on it to try to dampen it. And I just remember crying and screaming. I was doing that out of frustration because, as I said, it was a part of the jigsaw that was being broken. And it's really hard to wake up every morning having missed several parts of a jigsaw and then seeing policies that are actively contributing to destroy the jigsaw. But if I didn't get have hope. I wouldn't get out of bed. I wouldn't do my job. I do it because I do believe it. And I'm not being naive, because my whole job is to deal with numbers and probabilities. So if there wasn't a probability for the Amazon to be saved, I wouldn't be doing it. I mean, what's the point? I mean, what would be the point of my life, to be honest? So the point of my whole existence is because there is hope, is because, and it's not a naive hope, it's what the numbers shows, what the evidence shows. I do believe we can save the Amazon, but more than that, we have to.
Yeah, we have to. We don't have a choice.
No.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking with me and sharing that. And, you know, your experience, I think really connects to all of us, especially in the younger generations, where we know that we have to act and we know who to demand it from. And yeah, every day does feel like a little jigsaw piece puzzle is taken out of my heart. You know, a lot of things are disparaging and despairing, but you know, if there wasn't a probability that things can get better, then yeah, we wouldn't be doing the work that we're doing. Either people just making different choices at the grocery store, or people who are really, you know, making careers out of this to demand change. So, you know,
like you are. So thank you for your job.
Yeah, I also have hope, but I don't think I can express it as beautifully as you did. So thank you so much for speaking with me, and thank you for all the work that you do. And is there anything you want to promote before we log off?
No, just that, you know, get your hands on as much of Amazon literature, films, websites, YouTube videos that you can. That place is so magnificent. It has so many colors, so much smell. It's so overwhelming. It's almost claustrophobic for all our senses, because it is a sensory overload that I cannot recommend enough to everyone to feel a little bit of how I feel, because it's so beautiful, and we all need that beauty in our lives. So get to know more about the Amazon is what I would like to say.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.